Sona, Mitra, and Sudhirendar Sharma. Um, there's a brief bio of their backgrounds. Yamini Aiyer is from the Center for Policy Research. She heads the Accountability Initiative. They basically track the delivery of government programs. They basically track the delivery of government programs, and they have a very interesting project called PAISA. You can actually see this on their website. Sudhirendar Sharma, the way he introduced himself, which was very interesting, and I'll just introduce him the same way. He said he's a radical unprofessional. So he's with experience in several areas, microfinance, environment, ecology, and the last is Sona Mitra, who's from the Center for Budget Accountability. She's a public finance economist, looking into the budgeting or budgetary processes, not just at the national level, but also at the district level. So, welcome.
About why it is that we started working on this particular project, what we do, and share some of our findings. I think in the context of the topic of today's discussion, which is about governance and accountability, the PAISA work is essentially an example of a method that we have developed to try and get citizens engaged in understanding government, how government money flows through the system, which is fundamental to this question of accountability, and what are the implications of government, of the way in which money flows on the final accountability of government spending. So with that, let me start by telling you a little bit about why it is that we developed the PAISA project in the first place. What was our motivation? What was the accountability question that we were trying to understand? The work that we do is specifically in the context of elementary education. And as you'll see from this figure here, India's elementary education budget has been rising in the last few years. This rise is partly contributed a consequence of the right to education that was passed in 2009, as a result of which a significantly large amount of expectation was placed on the government to meet the norms and standards that the right to education had laid out for schools, for government schools in India. And while it is true, and I think perhaps Sona, you're going to be talking about that a little bit, that we perhaps are not putting in as much money as we should. The fact of the matter is that education budgets have risen, and risen significantly in the last few years. And the biggest, most important accountability question that we ask of government, and frankly we ask of ourselves on a day-to-day basis, is for what is the outcome of this investment? So it's all, in some ways, I'll go back to Delhi tomorrow, and many will ask me what have I been accountable for this last one day? What was the outcome of my coming here? Hopefully, the outcome of my coming here will be that I've spoken to you about our work, and you find it interesting, and it might be something that will intrigue you and make you curious, and you might apply some of the principles in your day-to-day work, for which I am accountable. Alternatively, I might do a really bad job, you might all fall asleep, and there you exercise your choice. And so the concept of accountability is essentially that you have given me the power to do something, and in this particular context, you've given me the power to talk to you for the next 20 minutes. And if I've been able to meet if I do my job well, for which I'm accountable, which is to talk to you and share with you what I'm doing and increase your curiosity, I will have done my job. And if I haven't done my job well, you have the power to walk out. So we have delegated the power in the context of government, for which we pay our taxes, for the government to do various things, for the provision of various services. And there is an outcome or an expectation that we expect from it, which is that children go to school and children learn. However, we find in the context of India, and here I borrow from data of our partner group, ASAR, that has been tracking learning outcomes for the better part of the last 6 years. If you ask the government of India what has been the outcome of the money that they have spent on elementary education, you'll find that by and large, most children, about half the children that finish class 5 can barely read a standard 2 textbook. And between 2006 and 2011, things haven't moved. Money is increased, but the outcomes seem to have remained completely stuck. This is the big accountability question that we are faced with. We are putting in a lot of money, and we don't seem to be getting the outcomes of that money. We disaggregated this a little bit further in the context of 7 states, to see whether there is any correlation between how much money the government spends per child and whether children in class 5 can actually read a standard 2 textbook. And you will see here, maybe correlation is not the right word, but you will see that there is definitely no link between the two. Let me give you one example. Take Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh. Maharashtra spends 12,075 rupees per child in the provision of education, government money. 64% of standard 5 children in Maharashtra can read a standard 2 textbook. Andhra Pradesh spends less at 8,390 and more or less the same, 60% children in standard 5 can read a standard 2 textbook. And let's look at what happens in Rajasthan and Bihar. Rajasthan spends a significantly more per child at 9,192 per child compared with Bihar, which spends about 4,000 something, close to 5,000, and there's a significant difference in learning outcomes. So there's something amiss here. We seem to be putting money in, but there doesn't seem to be a clear link between money being put in and outcomes that we get. And while there are many reasons why you get the outcomes that you do, and they're not always necessarily linked to money, this is one indicator of one of the big challenges that we face, that money is going in, the government seems to be putting some amounts of money in, but the net result of that money doesn't match up to our expectations. Why don't these outlays translate into outcomes? This was the main motivating question behind how we evolved the PAISA project. There are important questions that can be asked. Are we allocating the right resources and the right activities? That's one part of the question. Is money reaching where it should? This is another very important thing. First question is, are you putting money in the right places? And perhaps you might be, but is that money actually reaching anywhere? And sometime in the 1980s, then Prime Minister had commented that of every 1 rupee, about 15 paisa reaches, every 1 rupee of development funds, about 15 paisa reaches its final destination. This was a random guess estimate that he made, one that continues to be quoted all the way down into 2012. And I read a snippet in a newspaper some years ago where then Prime Minister's now son, who many believe is our Prime Minister in waiting, also makes the same guesstimate. And I found it quite amazing that 20, 25 years down the line, we still in the Indian system don't know of the 1 rupee that we allocate to development funds, how much actually reaches its final destination. So one part of the problem is whether you're allocating resources. The second part of the problem is whether those resources are reaching where they should. The third part of the problem is who's taking decisions on how this money should be spent and whether those decisions actually match needs on the ground. I could take decisions on how to spend 100 rupees for all of you, and in all likelihood, if I decide that 100 rupees should be spent on butter chicken, and there are many people here who would prefer idli sambar, the money would have gone spent poorly because none of you will eat the money. Will eat the idli sambar. So the 100 rupees may be spent, but it may not be spent on what it needs to be spent on. So these are some very important questions on how government public policy decisions are taken. Are we allocating the resources in the right places? Are the resources reaching where they should? And are they being spent in a manner that actually meets the needs and priorities of people on the ground? And as we saw just a little while ago in the previous 2 slides, in the particular context of elementary education, we seem to be allocating resources. But it seems quite clear that something about how those resources translate into action on the ground, how those resources reach their destination, how decisions are taken on those resources are breaking down, which is why we are not getting the outcomes that we intend to get from that money spent. And when we started asking these questions in 2008, when we set up the PAISA project, we discovered very quickly that it was actually very difficult to find this answer sitting behind a computer in Delhi. We went to, I'm not a public finance expert myself, I was interested in budgets and interested in public policy, and I tried online to look at government budgets which have been put up online. None of them made any sense to me. We then went to where Sona used to work, the National Institute of Public Finance Policy, where lots of public finance experts are people, all of whom have PhDs, to ask them whether they could tell us of the 15,000 crore rupees that were allocated in Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, how much money actually went to school. They said, well, we can give you a guess estimate, one done with very sophisticated modeling, but we will not be able to tell you the exact number because government doesn't seem to collect this number and it's difficult to find it. So it seemed to be quite clear to us that everybody seems to understand the problem. There's wide recognition that money is being spent, not enough, but money is being spent by the government. And the returns for that money, the outcomes of that expenditure, nowhere near match the expectation of what should be gotten. And when asked what actually happens with this money, there seemed to be very little information or very little empirical understanding of how policy decisions, how budgetary decisions actually translate into outcomes. And so we started tracking this ourselves, and that was the birth of the PAISA project. And what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes or so is to share some of the findings from this PAISA project. Here's what we do. We run 2 surveys on an annual basis. One is a national level survey, where we essentially isolate the quantum of money that goes specifically to schools. So out of the entire pie of the elementary education budget, which is the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan program run by the government of India, which is the main program through which the right to education is being implemented. So out of the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, how much money actually goes to schools? So we first identified that. And then along with a group called ASAR that tracks learning outcomes every year, we go to these schools to find out whether money has reached. If the money has reached, whether it's when it has reached, and if it, and based on that, has this money been spent? And if it's been spent, what has it been spent on? So the 3 very basic questions. So we thought money is being allocated. The first question we want to ask is money reaching its final destination? And the second question we want to ask is whether if this money is reaching, is it getting spent? So we were doing this on an annual basis. We then also realized that while on an annual basis we got a sense of what was happening all across the country, we did a survey we do this survey that covers about 15,000 schools across the country every year. It was also important to what was the outcomes we were seeing at the school were a consequence of actions and decisions that were taken by higher levels of government. The district was taking decisions, the block was taking decisions, all of which have a direct impact on this question of whether money reaches schools. And so we felt it was important to go in a little more depth to understand exactly what is happening at the school level. So we've now started a much more detailed set of work in 9 districts that are spread across 7 states in the country. And we've tracked how money flows right from the day it leaves the Government of India coffers all the way to the point when it reaches the school. We did this by looking at various government documents, and there are many acronyms on this slide which will make no sense to you. Believe me, it made no sense to me either when we started. And that's one of the very interesting peculiarities about government. That in some ways there's a lot of information that is generated, but this information is put together in such a technocratic and complicated way that we literally do development through acronyms rather than making our development processes available, accessible, and understandable to people, which is really what a democracy should be doing. But that's for a separate conversation. Anyhow, so we did a survey in about 1,300 schools across these 9 districts to really track the entire process by which money flows through the system and by which financial decisions are taken. Here's some of what we found. The first thing we looked at was how much, so I'm now going to focus just on the detailed studies that we did because it will give you a sense of how the entire elementary education system looks like. The first thing that we did was to really unpack the budget to see how much money is spent on different key aspects of the elementary education system. We find that in all, about 72% of the elementary education budget goes to teacher salaries. Makes sense, you can't have a school without a teacher. But it also opens up a very important accountability question that if the bulk of our budget is going on teacher salaries, the question is, are teachers actually going to schools and performing? So, so that link is really important. About 15% of the budget is spent on building school infrastructure. About 7% of the budget is spent on children, and by children we mean programs that are directly aimed at bringing children into school, increasing enrollments, ensuring that children that don't attend schools turn up in schools. About 1% of the money is spent on quality, directly on quality, with specific programs that the government has started to deal with the fact that more than 50% of children that come out of class 5 can't read a standard 2 textbook. Which also tells you a little bit about how the government is prioritizing its money. So if you go back to the first question that we had asked, are we putting money on the right things? This is an important question. We're putting a lot of money in teachers, but we know that teachers often don't show up in schools. We know that the quality problem is a very big one. We're putting very little amounts of money on that. We're putting some amount of money on building school infrastructure, and we're putting a little bit of money in trying to get children to attend school on a regular basis. So this is sort of how the education system has been prioritized. When it comes to what goes to schools, we find that only about 5% of the total budget reaches the school. So all of this money is being spent by the district administration. The school gets about 5% of the total budget, over which then the school can take some decisions. So the next big question, I'm going to skip a few slides here, is how does this money actually flow down to the districts? This is what it looks like. This is what the story looks like in 9 districts. You ask for a certain amount of money, you have a budgetary allocation. The next question is whether you get all of this money. And as you can see in this slide, very few districts, in fact no district gets all the money that it has been budgeted. So it's almost like telling you to organize a panel discussion, and I'm going to give you 100 rupees to organize that panel discussion. And when it comes to you having to actually ensure that you have mics, you have speakers, you have an auditorium where the panel discussion can be held, as you start going about that process, somebody says, no, well, you might need 100 rupees, but I'm only going to give you 50. How do you, as a district administrator in that situation, take a decision? So you have a budget, you have a decision that is taken that this is the amount of money that's going to be given to you. And when it comes to actually providing that money, we seem to give much less than what is asked for, which makes making expenditure decisions quite difficult. The other problem is that money often doesn't reach on time. This is the example of a very well-administered state called Himachal Pradesh, in which we started working in a district called Kangra. Kangra is where Dharamshala is. It's a very sort of well-known, accessible district in Himachal Pradesh, and has on all development indicators relatively high up. So we assumed that in a district like Kangra, you have a budget of 100 rupees, it should come to you steadily through the course of the year. This money should probably have reached well in time. But we find, in fact, that money reaches only about 30 to 40% of the money reaches by December, and most of this money reaches somewhere between December and March. So it's in the last 3 months of the financial year when most of the money comes. So schools run through the year, right? Teachers have to be paid through the year. Building construction has to be undertaken through the year. Textbooks have to be provided. Uniforms have to be provided. There's lots of things that happen in a school that happen through the year, through the school calendar year. But the government, for some reason, is unable to ensure that the money reaches on time. It seems to make an effort to push most of its money right towards the end of the financial year. What happens then? If I'm supposed to have spent 100 rupees steadily over the year, but I get most of that money only in the last 3 months, and then I'm told, because that's how the government system works, that if I don't spend this money by March 31st, then I'm not going to give you your next year's budget. So there's a lot of pressure to spend. And by the way, I'm going to monitor your job performance based on how much you have spent, because your financial progress report is the key target that I'm going to monitor. What are you going to do? You're going to very, very quickly spend this money very, very fast without taking into consideration the real needs of the schools. We find from our national surveys that more than 60% of schools, of elementary schools in India, whitewash their walls every year. Now, I am very house proud. I like to have pretty things around me. I like to have perfectly whitewashed walls. But I don't ever feel that my house needs to be whitewashed more than once in 3 years. Schools in this country do not need to be whitewashed every single year. And if you think about what schools need, you could actually have a well-functioning school with dirty walls. Dirty walls isn't really the... but because we don't get money down to the system on time, and because there's this last-minute rush to spend money, money has to get spent on the one thing that's very easy to do. Whitewashing walls is very easy to do. It doesn't require you to think. You just call the local contractor, they bring the plaster and the paint, and they whitewash the wall. So that's just one example of how things go wrong. I recently read an article in the Rajasthan Patrika in Rajasthan, which is also one of the states where we do this work. Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan hired teachers whose salary accounts for about 20,000 rupees a month if you're a regular teacher, haven't been paid for 3 months because the state government says that exactly the problem we are seeing here in the district, and actually the two graphs show the district and the state story. So money doesn't reach the state and therefore it doesn't reach the district. The state government says that the central government hasn't given us money, so therefore we don't have enough money in our coffers to pay teachers. Teachers are then saying that we have to go on strike outside the district office, so we're not going to turn up in schools because we haven't been paid our salaries. And that also adds to this larger problem of teacher motivation. So if you don't get your money down on time, the system is not able to function, and even simple things like paying teacher salaries don't seem to happen on a regular basis. Now the larger implication of this are, one, as I mentioned, that money gets spent very quickly and not necessarily on things that it should be. The second thing is that as a district administrator, if I don't know whether I'm going to get all the money that I need to implement a program in a district in a given year, if I don't know when I'm going to get that money, the best thing I can do, frankly, is not do anything and just wait till March 31st when all the auditors and all the finance officers in the state government are going to say, quickly show me the utilization certificates, quickly spend some money on something, give some utilization certificates and send it back. So therefore, I'm not going to be really thinking about the needs of my district, the education needs of my district when I decide how to spend. I'm going to be thinking of how soon can I spend in the last 1 month so that I can meet all the paperwork requirements, which is a standard problem in the government system and one of the main reasons why we don't seem to be getting bang for our buck. What happens at the school level? We see exactly the same story. April to July, that's about when most of the schools in this country start functioning. October and November is when schools get the small amount of money that they're supposed to get. So, in fact, when we were making this presentation to some government officers, so the education officer of Assam said, oh, in Assam it's even worse, and Assam incidentally is not part of our sample for this study, because in Assam the schools run December to January, and most of the money seems to reach only in November. The money that schools get is basic money for small things, chalks, dusters, buying mats on which students can sit. So these are basic small things that are needed to be, small activities that need to be undertaken in order for the school to function on a day-to-day basis. The school opens sometime in April, money comes halfway through the school year. So there seem to be inordinate amount of delays, not just at the district level, but perhaps because district hardly ever gets its money on time, also at the school level, which makes spending money based on what schools need very, very difficult. And what's the other interesting thing is that we find that while schools get their money, you'll see here we just track the money that schools are supposed to get. Not all schools get all their money every year. And in poorer districts, take Pune, which is a district in Bihar, and Jalpaiguri, which is a district in Northwest Bengal, only 29% schools in Pune and 23% schools in Jalpaiguri actually got their money over the 2-year cycle where we track them, got their money on both years. So there's a small amount of money that a school needs to run the school on a day-to-day basis. And for some reason, the government system isn't able to ensure that all schools get all of this money every year. Of course, there's a big difference in terms of the quality of governance. And I think what the Kangra and Satara, which are two relatively well-governed districts, the story that they are telling us is that if you get things right, if you get your governance systems right, you can actually get money down where it needs to. So there's examples of where it does work, and then there's examples of where it's pretty much the Wild West. Why is it that the government isn't able to do something as simple as getting small amounts of money down to schools? And here's where the story becomes really interesting. We found that one of the most important reasons why schools weren't able to get their monies every year is because they weren't able to show their utilization certificates. And so, which is the document that you need to show for having spent all the money. So you create this vicious cycle in government. You don't get money down to its destinations on time, and then you make the next year's money contingent on your spending. So you create these perverse incentives where the only way in which you can get your money is to quickly spend and show these utilization certificates. And if you're unable to show the utilization certificates, you don't get your money, and then you fall out of the circle. The other interesting thing is, you will get your money dependent on which bank you have your bank account in. If it's a state bank, then chances are you'll get your money quickly because they are part of an electronic transfer network. But many parts of this country don't have electronic transfer networks. This is a poor country. And so the entire cycle of getting the money transfer can take a significantly long time. But we also find that sometimes it can be very basic things like the district education administrator's job is, amongst many other things, to take all the bank account details down on a piece of paper and forward it to the bank that is supposed to transfer money. Often he gets the name wrong, and he gets the bank account details wrong. And so it takes another round of paperwork to make up for the mistake, for the errors in the first round, which can take anywhere between 1 month to 6 to 8 months, and you've closed the financial year, you've closed the school year, and money hasn't reached. So basic things like administrative capacity are extremely weak. We also find that in many parts of the country, management officers are not available. Administrative officers are not available. So there are a huge amount of vacancies. Bihar Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, we find that 36% of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan posts are vacant. In Maharashtra, we found a similar thing. We found almost 50% of junior engineers were not available. So there's a huge amount of vacancies. And those vacancies mean that papers don't get pushed. The system is based on paper, and in the absence of paper, you don't get things don't happen, and even the simple thing like getting money down to the school on time doesn't actually doesn't happen on time. Consequently, like I mentioned, there's no correlation between expenditures and needs on the ground. Here's an example of we broke the expenditures of one district in Madhya Pradesh. Here's an example of what's happening. If you see, the blue line is expenditures that happened between December and March, so in the last 3 months, and the brown line is expenditures that happened from the start of the financial year till December. I think the story is self-explanatory. And look at the issue of quality. Now that's, if you think about the biggest problem in our education system, which is quality, very little money is spent on quality till December, and suddenly there's a massive rush. So it's sort of a quick last minute, we have to show utilization certificates, something is done. Interestingly, we find the same in school infrastructure. And here the story gets even murkier. I had always assumed that if there's one thing that the government knew how to do, it was to build. Because it's a straightforward thing. Contractors are brought in. There's a lot of money that could be exchanged hands. Everybody has incentive to build. However, it turns out that our administrative capacity is so weak that even building is not easy. And what districts tend to do is that they wait till all the money comes in March, and then they have to show that they have spent money. And the accounting system allows a district to show that if you release money from your bank account to the school bank account, then it is taken as an expenditure. It means you have done your job. So in the last 2 months, they very quickly release money to all the school bank accounts where building needs to be done. But in order to actually build, you have to get clearances on one estimation in one that we made at least 4 departments. You need to get PWD, you need to get rural development because land acquisition is a big issue, so on and so forth. There's tendering, there's procurement, there's a long cycle, and it can take anywhere between 6 months to 2 years to actually start the building process. In Bihar, I found a very interesting headmaster who was talking about how he got 2 lakhs of rupees in his bank account in 2008 to build a classroom. But the school boundary did not have enough land to be able to build the classroom, and they had to negotiate with the panchayats to get more land to build this classroom. And so this 2 lakhs was sitting there. In between 2009 and 2011, when he actually started constructing the school, his daughter had to get married, and he didn't have the cash to marry his daughter. So he borrowed the 2 lakhs, got his daughter married off, and being a really honest headmaster, किश्तों में मैंने वापस किया. So in installments, he returned the 2 lakhs into the bank account and built the classroom, which was there in front of my eyes to see. But 2 lakhs of money was just sitting there for the better part of 2 years, and we are lucky in this case. I found an honest headmaster who related the story to me and paid the money back. But in many cases, money just sits there and sits and waits and waits and waits for all this red tape and paperwork and interdepartmental turf wars to get completed. However, our planning and budgeting cycle functions on an annual basis. And with policy pressures to build classrooms for the number of students, to ensure that there's a girls' toilet in every school, so on and so forth, the infrastructure budgets in every district since 2009 have more than doubled. So a lot of money is going and sitting in bank accounts, eventually perhaps in school bank accounts, but we don't actually see any construction taking place. So it's sort of, you have this policy intent to change, to change the infrastructure of schools. You've even put the money, but you don't actually see schools meeting those requirements. And the Supreme Court has recently ordered all state governments all over again to ensure that they build girls' toilets and classrooms, etc., based on what the right to education requires them for. But district administrations say, but we are incapacitated, what can we do? We have to go through all of this paperwork in order to get things started. So at best, we can release money and let it sit in a bank. And it sits there, and it sits there, and it sits there. And that's how the cycle continues. Okay, the last point, and I won't go into this will confuse you because there's a lot more and I've run out of looking at. One is whether money reaches. As the data I've shown you shows, money does reach, but it reaches usually towards the end of the financial year, and therefore it doesn't get money gets spent, but not get spent on needs and priorities. We also find that there is, because money reaches so late, very often even at the school level, although schools are supposed to spend money based on what they think are the requirements of the school, they actually wait to get orders from the district and the block level. So we have again a policy intent that says that money should be spent at the local level based on local needs. We are allocating 5% of the entire education budget to schools to spend this money. Yet when we found at the school level, we were asking headmasters what do you spend your money on, and they say by and large that we wait for orders from the district administration to spend this money. So it seems like decisions on spending are being taken at higher levels of government, and the money is getting, and schools are spending this money. What are the implications of that? Well, we came across many schools, and we continue to come across many schools, where money is getting spent on things that they don't really need. And this is best illustrated by a school I encountered in Purnia in Bihar. Purnia is a very poor district in Bihar, and therefore there are many schools that are being run that don't actually have buildings. So they're waiting for their building grants, but there's students that come, there's a teacher, there's a headmaster, and in the end you want children and you need a teacher. You don't need very much more for education to happen. So it's a good thing that there is a functional school, so to speak, and therefore this school also gets its school grants. The district administration of Purnia had gone through a tendering process for fire extinguishers and issued an order to all schools that they should spend their grant money on buying fire extinguishers. So this buildingless school had to also show a utilization certificate at the end of the year of the spending, and because the order was to spend it on fire extinguishers, went and purchased a fire extinguisher and then told the fire extinguisher tender, the shop from which all the schools were buying fire extinguishers, they just hold it there. When we get our building grant, we'll make the building and we take the fire extinguisher from you. And the point of this story is to say that the way in which the money is flowing and the way in which decisions on how to spend this money are being taken in our system right now, it's being managed in such a way that decisions are being taken at a point very far away from where money is actually being spent. And therefore, often, money is getting spent on things that schools don't actually need. It's no surprise then that you find that even though the education budget has increased a lot, children may not be learning. Because for a school to actually take a decision on what and how it wants to spend its money, and whether and how to ensure that money is spent based on what children and schools need, the system doesn't allow it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Himanshu and everybody else in the Azim Premji Foundation for giving CBGA a chance to present its budget analysis and advocacy work that we have been doing over the years, and not spending much time on introductions. I'll just get into my presentation. Today we are going to speak on, I'm going to speak on this basically the adequacy of budgetary resources for social sectors and quality of utilization of funds in the social sector schemes. By this we mean that we at the Center for Budget and Governance Accountability, we track social sector expenditures from a point of view of budgets. And how do we look at budgets and how do we demystify budgets, because budgets come across to people as a as a document which is very technical and cannot be read by the layman, and that is what our idea is, to break budgets from its jargons and make it easily accessible for everybody, so that people understand that budgets are accountable to people, and this is what our idea is, to make budgets accountable to the people and specifically to the disadvantaged section of the population. And also, we do this by promoting and we also promote transparency and accountability in budgets. By that I mean a part of demystification of budgets, and also based on our research findings, we do go to the parliamentarians, the ministers, and also activists at the local levels, and do advocacy with them based on our thorough research findings. Now, we have to understand what budgets are, and for that we have to look at this, that budgets generally are divided into three major heads: the general and the economic general services, the economic services, and the social sector services. And here in among all these heads, we concentrate our analysis on the social services, which include education, health and family welfare, water supply, and all the other socially sensitive sectors of expenditure. Now, the social services typically include those in which government's intervention have direct impact on human development. Now, what do we mean by that? By this we mean that social sectors, as we said, that health, education, and the previous speaker spoke on how they have been tracking the education scheme, the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, or the elementary education. We do it for all the social sectors from point of view of budget, and how these social sector, how the government interventions have affected the disadvantaged section, have the proper beneficiaries been affected, have the benefits reached the intended beneficiaries, and we also look at this major question of the utilization of funds. Now, in India, we have seen that public expenditure on social sectors as compared to the size of India's economy, that is as percentage of the GDP, has been very low. Now, this trends in now the social sector expenditure in the union budget has been stepped up since 2004-05 when the common minimum program was adopted by the central government, which actually focused on development of the social sector, specifically education, health, sanitation, hygiene, family welfare, and major flagship programs were developed, centrally sponsored schemes which are called, like the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, the National Rural Health Mission, the NREGA, the NRDWP, which is the Rural Drinking Water Program, the Total Sanitation Campaign, the Midday Meal Scheme, and the ICDS. Now, these were major flagship programs which took away the union government's major expenditure on social sectors, and that is how that is how the social sector expenditures were stepped up since 2004-05. However, state governments initially, prior to 2004-05, state governments used to incur 75 to 80% of their total public expenditure on social sectors, which has actually witnessed stagnation. The priority for social sector in the state budgets had declined during 2001 to 2004-05. Now, this is from the point of view of state budget. Since the union government has taken up this entire responsibility of spending on social sectors, the state budgets have shown a kind of stagnation on spendings on social sectors. Now, the small improvements in spending on social sectors since 2005-06 has happened mostly in the plan schemes, while non-plan spending on the sectors has been checked by the states. Now, we have to understand what are plan schemes and what are non-plan schemes. Plan schemes are essentially those which are designed and financed by the Planning Commission, and these basically call for all the major flagship programs. Now, and the non-plan schemes are those which come to the states from the Finance Commission, and those are grants to the states, and these non-plan funds are mostly related to the center and states sharing of resources. Now, since the adoption of the centrally sponsored schemes, the union government's plan expenditure has increased towards social sector. But on the other hand, we see that for the states, the spending on social sectors has faced a stagnation. If you look at this graph, you'll see that these blue lines, which actually shows that the total budgetary expenditure as percentage of GDP is pretty high, around 25%. Out of these, social sector expenditure as percentage of GDP is only around 5 to 8%. Now, if we look at in that social sector expenditure, if we look at the share of center and states in total social sector expenditure, we find that the union government share is much higher than the states, and there is a stagnation in the states share of expenditure on social sector. Now why has this happened? This has happened, as I just said, that bulk of the expenditure on social sectors were taken away by the planned schemes, which were basically the centrally sponsored schemes, which on the one hand stepped up the expenditures by the union government, but for the states it provided a stagnation. The states which earlier used to incur quite a lot of expenditure on the social sectors prior to the adoption of the flagship programs, now after the adoption of the centrally sponsored, the flagship programs, the big bang schemes, has actually stagnated. Now, why am I talking about why am I so much bothered about these centrally sponsored schemes and these planned schemes, and what are the problems related to it? You see, Yamini prior to me just spoke in detail about one very small aspect of this entire centrally sponsored schemes. Now, and she was trying to give you snippets and short stories of what is happening to the entire system. We would just I would just like to say that there's this one-size-fits-all approach towards the centrally sponsored schemes. By this I mean that we have different states with different levels of requirements, different needs, but the centrally sponsored schemes are planned schemes designed at the planning commission level, at the union government level, and have a very tight framework of implementation, and which may not be fulfill the requirements of the local level states. And there's also this issue of tied versus untied fund, because the planned schemes call for funds which are tied in nature. They have their fixed components, the fixed heads, and these heads are very inflexible in nature. So if a state suppose requires for not for building schools under the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, if it requires money to buy uniform for the students and not for building schools, it will not be able to utilize the money that is there for building schools and not for the uniforms. There's also this entire question of fund devolution. You see, the centrally sponsored schemes, in my view, have two problems. First is this one-size-fits-all approach, and the second is this strong tendency of centralization. You see, we have a decentralized system in this country, but which is constitutional, but the centrally sponsored schemes are essentially so centralized in nature. They have been like the National Rural Health Mission, which is a central planned scheme, whereas health is supposedly a state subject, which should have this program, which should have been implemented and designed at the state level, has been designed by the center. Now this is where the problem lies. If we have had a decentralized system of planning, a need-based approach, then probably these implementation problems, as Yamini was pointing out, might have been easier to be resolved. But because we have plans at a center, and then that percolates down to the states, that is where the major problem lies, and hence the funds remain unutilized. However, when we looked at some of the components, supposing in the NRDWP, that is the Rural Drinking Water Project, in some of the states, while planning have come at a bottom-up level of participation, where the participatory process was much higher, there we have seen that in some cases that funds have been utilized very well. In some cases, there we have found that funds have been inadequate. So the whole idea is that when you have proper design of schemes with proper participation from the grassroots level, from the people who know, from the local level, at the panchayat level, and only then can the schemes would be implemented properly, and only then would the funds be utilized. So this basically calls for a bottom-up process of planning, monitoring, and planning, implementation, and monitoring. Now, why we say that states have not been able to absorb these funds? if we look at, when we did a study of 2 states and with in collaboration with the UNICEF, where we looked at the NRHM and the SSA and all these major flagship schemes that that are in vogue, we were tracking them. We found that several states, typically the poorer ones, have shown noticeable levels of underutilization of budget outlays meant for planned expenditure. Now, this is precisely because of the reasons that I have cited, because planned expenditures are essentially of tied nature and have a fixed framework, and states might not have those needs. In fact, if I have to give you an example, supposing in Kerala, in the initial phases of NRHM is a targeted program to improve maternal mortality rates, the infant mortality rates, and several other components. But in Kerala, all these rates have been quite, they have reached a level which can be compared to the European countries level, advanced capitalist country level. But, so therefore, the NRHM funds in Kerala could not be utilized for their requirements, because the requirements in Kerala, for the health requirements in Kerala were much different. They were for controlling geriatric diseases, they were for controlling the lifestyle diseases, there was this entire mental health and cancer problems in Kerala, which none of these NRHM funds could address. So a lot of funds remain unutilized till 2007, 2008. Post that, in the second phase of NRHM, this flexibility of heads was incorporated, and then NRHM funds started getting better utilized in Kerala. So this is one example which I am trying to give you to make you understand that how local level needs are important for designing the schemes, otherwise the funds would definitely remain unutilized. On the other hand, if we look at the non-plan expenditure side, in case of budget outlays meant for non-plan expenditure at the state budget level in social sector, this underutilization is much lesser. Now at the state budgets, these non-plan expenditures are mainly for recruitment purposes, for the construction of buildings, and a large part of non-plan spending is meant for maintenance of the establishment. And this is precisely why in the social sector state budgets, social sectors, the share of social sector spendings under the non-plan expenditure has been much higher, because states, when they do not know how to expend the plan funds, they just keep building unnecessary, they just do unnecessary buildings, constructions, which do not fulfill the basic requirements, and hence the non-plan funds are expended much more. You can see this entire study which we did in Chhattisgarh and UP, we tracked mainly the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, the midday meal, the NRHM. The evidence that we gathered that pertained to 2007-8 for the first 2 years of the 11th plan, it was mainly focused on fund flow and the quality of fund utilization. Now, two major things that we came across was the skewed nature of fund utilization. One, the skewness, the skewed component, the fund utilization was skewed over components. So, supposing it was the National Rural Health Mission, in the initial years when there are 5 components in the National Rural Health Mission, and the first component is the reproductive child health activities, which is reproductive and child health, which is the major component which takes away a lot of the funds. And the other components like the National Disease Control Program and other components, they are the funds. Those are the ones which share much lesser utilization of funds. So why is that? That is once again because while RCH has been implemented better, the needs were there to bring in more voluntary health workers, and also to provide institutional delivery mechanism to the women. That's precisely why in this under the NRHM there is this tendency of skewed fund utilization across components. Also, we found skewed. This is also true for the education part, as Yamini had mentioned. So I won't get into the education thing. And also, these funds have been utilized the funds have been skewed across time periods. Now, as she said that there is always a mad rush towards the end of the financial year, we also found in the study that it is not only one part or one small elementary education. It is actually for most of the schemes that at the end of the financial year there is a mad rush to spend the amount, because otherwise those funds are supposed to go back. They remain unutilized and they just go back. So it is always like spending in scheme is skewed across 4 quarters in the financial. The first 3 quarters show lower spending and the last quarter is always high. Also, we found that spending was skewed across different regions covered by the scheme, that is within regions, across different districts within the state and across different blocks within the districts. So all of it actually comes down to again the design of the scheme, how it is designed, whether it is suited to the local needs and whether the local participatory processes have been taken up to design the scheme, because without that we have realized that the planned schemes do not work effectively. Now, then you have these, and without these proper designing, then you have these bottlenecks of the budgetary processes, which causes delay of flow of funds at various levels of fund flow, and also you have delays in sending. I mean, you have to plan a program, you have to do a program implementation planning and send it across, get it sanctioned, and only then you can get the funds flowing from the top to the local level, and that sanction and those things are delayed if there is not if there is no proper local level participation. When we looked at these designs and schemes, we also looked at this responsiveness of budgets to the disadvantaged sections. Now, we have this gender budgeting, as you know, a process which has been taken up by the union government. We are also advocating for SCs and STs, that is the tribal budgeting and the Dalit budgeting processes and the budgeting for the religious minorities. This is from an idea that budgets are accountable to the disadvantaged sections of the population, and why we have been focusing on this is because most of the benefits of the schemes have been incidental rather than direct, focused, policy-driven benefits. Now, this recognition has been by the government of India, that has led to the adoption of the planned strategies like the special component plan for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes and the women's component plan. Now, here the major concern is whether the various schemes under the different ministries are designed in such a way that they can address the causal factors of the challenges. But why do we need Dalit budgeting, or why do we need gender budgeting? That is because of the basic fact that these the SCs and STs who constitute 1/4 of our population of the country have been the most disadvantaged sections of the population, and so there has been inadequate policy priorities for SCs and STs in the entire government planning system. And this has been reflected in the plan allocations by the union ministries and the state governments, where funds have not been in proportions to the population of the SCs and STs. Now, there have been gaps in budget often manifested in the diversion of funds meant for scheduled caste component plan and tribal sub-plan into other purposes. Most of the times these funds are flexible, you can use it for other things, and therefore they get diverted because at the local level you do not know how to utilize these funds, and the states have been asking for separate allocations as in proportion to the composition of the population for SCs, STs and for the SCs and the STs, but that has still not taken place. Similarly, for the gender budgeting thing, like now the union government has given us a gender budgeting statement, which comes as a statement of post the budget analysis, and it is in fact a post budget analysis. It is an ex post analysis in the sense that once budget is placed, There's the women's component plan, and then there are different schemes in which how much expenditure has been allocated towards women, and that is how ex post analysis of gender budget statement is done at the different ministry level, the rural development, the health ministry, everywhere, and then that is collated together to produce the gender budget statement, which is just an ex post analysis to show how much money has been allocated to the women. But that is not what we advocate for. We should advocate for. What we should look at is an ex-ante analysis, how women and how policy priorities for women can be incorporated into the budgetary and planning processes prior to placing the budgets and not after the budgets have been placed. Now, what has been our initiatives in terms of promoting transparency and accountability in the budgets? Now, we have focused mainly on the quality of government interventions in the social sector and responsiveness of budgets to disadvantaged sections of the population, and we have also looked at the structural issues in India's fiscal federalism. Now, what is this Indian fiscal federal structure? It provides us with a decentralized system of governance where states and the panchayats, the three-tier rural government and the urban local governments have been given certain authorities and some powers to also have a share in the funds, but that has not been implemented properly till now, and that is what we have been advocating, and that is also one of the major things that we have been advocating for. Lastly, I would just like to wind up with this, that what have been CBGA's advocacy efforts? We at the CBGA, we have done this People's Budget Initiative, which is basically a coalition of civil society organizations at several states that comes together before the budgets, during the end of the year, when all the line departments in the ministries are busy preparing their budgets, so that by March, when the budget is placed, everything is ready. And this is the time when the People's Budget Initiative, for which CBGA is the secretariat, it actually prepares a charter of demands as to what we demand from the current year's budget. We are at present in the process of this regional conventions and formulating this charter of demands, and this is by the end of this year we would be out with the charter of demands before the next budget is placed in March. Also, we have done an open budget survey and a transparency study of state budgets, which is basically to look at how transparent, how accountable budgets have been within 10 states in India. And we have found out that while Karnataka was not on our list, but we have found out that Kerala, which is a very fairly decentralized state, in a relative ranking has not come out very well. On the other hand, the surprises have been like states like Gujarat, which comes across as a very centralized state, has done relatively better. So these have been our studies, which you can have a look at the website. And finally, we at CBGA, immediately after the budget is placed, we have this thorough background research of what we have felt of this year's budget. We always come out with detailed analysis of the union budget within the 24 hours of its presentation in the parliament. So our entire idea, what we do at the Center for Budget and Governance Accountability, is a mix of research and advocacy. While on the one hand, we look at the issues of fund utilization, design of schemes, design of plan schemes, and also on the in India's fiscal federal structure. On the other hand, we advocate with the parliamentarians, with the ministers, with the funding agencies, and with other related stakeholders to carry forward the research findings that we do, that we actually have after having a detailed analysis, having done a detailed analysis of the union and the state budgets. I think that is all. Thank you.
It's more than 40 minutes of non-stop lecturing. It might be a little taxing for to grapple. But we have a lot of numbers in budget here, but let's now move on to words. Because words, since the time of Aristotle and Plato, have been the subject for philosophical and political discourse. So I'm concentrating more on words. And also when you're in a university, I tend to talk more about words because there's the words which matter in an academic setup. Let me make one observation here. To whom I am talking to, including myself. I am talking to not to people who are part of the market economy at one time, but who are part of the market society now. So keep that in mind. You have moved from market economy to market society yourself. So everything that you think is in terms of market, in terms of profit, in terms of gains, in terms of placements for academic. So it's not academics in that sense which have been followed in the past. It's academic in the sense of gaining financially at the end of the day. So that's just an observation to say to situate ourselves in the discussion that I'm raising here. When we started talking, Himanshu talking to me about this panel discussion, I was struggling with some of the issues myself. And some of the issues, those struggles, those contentions, I'm going to raise here for your attention, and you can always add to my knowledge as well. The title I'm raising here is Public Reasoning for Public Policy. And why I bring this here is because one of the issues that was being discussed earlier, which didn't appear in this panel discussion, was the creation of National Investment Board. Many of you would know about that. That there's an apex body under the chairmanship of Prime Minister, which will look at all the infrastructure projects over 1,000 crores. If there is any delay, the Prime Minister will personally look into the matter and say that these get speeded up. Now, in doing so, all the consideration, all the regulations will be put to rest, because the growth of the country is more important than other considerations, whether they are social or economic. So that was the basis on which my idea of coming here was discussed. But then I was asking myself the fundamental question that why we do not have the space to reason with the government on some of its steps that it takes. For example, the programs and the various schemes that it has, you never get to know who designed it, why it was designed, although many of them are very useful. But the fact of the matter is that how these are designed in the first place, that's important for me. We live in a very deficit scenario. All that you have heard from the two presentations is deficit of various kinds. Accountability deficit is there, this has been discussed. Coherence deficit, from one political party to another, from one government to another, there is no coherence in the kind of things that people do. Compliance deficit. You can check the website yourself and Google search. Several of the Supreme Court orders have yet not been complied in this country, and there is no contempt of court. I can give one example. It was 1994 that Supreme Court appointed a high-level committee in Delhi to ensure that the water in Yamuna, at least 10,000 liters of fresh water should flow into the Yamuna on a daily basis, from the entry point of the river to the end. 94. We are in 2012. Not a single drop of fresh water flows in Yamuna ever. No, there is no compliance and there is no contempt of the court ever. The third issue is credibility deficit. I need not talk a lot about it. You already know about the credibility of the governments, past, present, or even the present. Then there is a consistency deficit of talk about conscience deficit. Much of the the budgetary thing you saw, there is a conscience. There is a genuine lack of conscience in people who are delivering these services, not to do what they're supposed to do. So if you look at all these deficits, including the accountability deficit, you end up with something called deficit democracy. So we are situated in a setup where the democracy itself is deficit. So therefore, what we are expecting in terms of developing policy, if you're talking about public policy as a subject, to develop public policy in a deficit democracy would be a big challenge for us to face. Now let me put something else which is more upper middle class or the background that we come from, the market society. There are 5 different assumptions that we make in a very egalitarian, elitist kind of society, which leads to injustice. Now that is elitism is efficient. You need to understand what elitism is. Exclusion is necessary. The poor people let them be poor. Let the market grow, let the growth of the country take its own course. Poor will definitely be taken into account at a later stage, which means we are excluding them in the primary disposition. Prejudice is natural, whether it's a caste, creed, financial or otherwise. And greed is good. Market society, greed has to be good. Buy one and get 2 free. Buy one, get 3 free, why not? And despair is inevitable. Now all these 5 different assumptions of the upper middle class, of a market society, leads to 5 different kinds of social evils which are perpetuated and justified. And those are squalor, ignorance, want, idleness, and disease. Now you have to correlate these two to try to understand why these social evils are perpetuated and justified in a deficient democracy. Try to understand that. Now, when we make demands, when all of us educated middle class people, when we make demands, we demand, but the underlying assumption or underlying understanding that we have is that we are cynical about the state itself. And I'm sure 99% of people sitting in the hall are cynical about the state itself. Given a chance and given an opportunity, they would like to throw the state out, simply put, which has happened in the various other countries. So that cynicism is important, but cynicism nevertheless exists. And then we are all wanting change. Some kind of change. We don't know, sometimes we don't know what kind of change, but we know that we want to change. And accountability, you heard these 2 presentations, demand for accountability. We're wanting people who are in power, people who are supposed to deliver services to be held accountable. And freedom is something which you don't want to compromise. So there's a desire for freedom all the way. Therefore, at the end, what we actually are demanding, we're not wanting a representative democracy, which we are for the last 60, 70 years, but we want a participatory democracy. Now, when you want participatory democracy, then where does it lead to? The fundamental issues that we raise when we talk about deficient democracy, what we're coming to, the hope that we had in the market processes was that the neoliberalism will provide an alternative, but that has failed. The market recession in the last few years, you know that the neoliberalism itself has failed to deliver an alternative to the kind of state machinery that we have in place. The second thing is the institutions that we have today are we're in 21st century, but most of our institutions are 19th century or even 18th century institutions. So the institutions have been unable to read the reason for public anguish, not only in India, elsewhere too, but I'm focusing more on India. You know for what anguish you are. You've seen anguish on the streets, all across. Finally, there is lack of space of public reason in influencing public policy. First of all, I doubt if there is any public policy. I mentioned in the forum, in this short discussion, I think there is a policy which is applied to the public, not the other way around. But you can discuss it yourself. Now, when I say what is reason, you might be asking what is reason, why it is important, and why should reason be given some space. Much of what you saw just presented by the two speakers, they are reasoning out. They are putting their reasons in front of us. But the point is, where do they reason it out? And with whom? Where is the space? So the trouble here is, and my own assumption or my understanding is, public reason requires continual re-performance in democratic space. Now what do you mean by re-performance? It does not necessarily mean that you have to perform like a stage play. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying legitimacy of public reason depends not on logic and content alone, but on the performance of reasoning in public square. Now that's important. How do you reason it out and re-perform it on a perpetual basis for the state to at least take note of? That's the meaning that I draw from the point 1. Public reason as a democratic norm needs constant appeals to the law. I mentioned to you that many of the laws, many of the judgments have not been complied with. So which means we have to again knock at the doors of the law and say that many of the things that you reasoned out in your judgments haven't been complied with. But we need to create a space for doing that. Public reason challenges the inevitable to encourage participation. Now, if you start reasoning, the participation increases. Let me give you an example. A couple of years ago, if you all know, Jeremy May started bringing BT Brinjal discourse into public. Now, that was based on the reasoning which was already put on the table, which was already in circulation. And Jairam only took lead in bringing it out in the public. And you saw the participation increasing. You saw huge participation. And what it led to finally is that a parliamentary standing committee on biotechnology came into play, and which ruled out all the genetically modified, and it raised questions, a lot of questions on that. And today, all those who were justifying, all the multinational companies who were justifying genetically modified products as the panacea to all our problems, today are sitting ducks. They don't know, they have lost their arguments. Because the parliamentary standing committee, which is made of people from all political parties, have come to the conclusion based on reasoning which was put forth many years ago that this needs to be questioned. The GM food coming into society needs to be questioned. So today they are searching for answers themselves. So public reasoning therefore leads us to different kind of paradigm shift in our society, which therefore is, had it not been there, imagine what would happen in the situation. So how reason becomes a cause for changing policy. Keep that in mind. And I mentioned here, public reason is never achieved. Sorry, it's never attained, but it has to be achieved. And there are several examples in which you can discuss it. You can discuss it, you can think about it. There are many examples in our own domain nearby that you can figure out, okay, this has to be achieved, not attained. And currently, whatever opposition you see, whatever discourse you see in the civic space, you find that in reasoning is finding some little space. But I'm saying, as a mechanism, as a process, it doesn't exist. And the state does not allow that to happen. For example, when I talk about biotechnology, as one example in which reasoning has perhaps worked, if you look at the nuclear debate, reasoning hasn't. If you look at many other debates, the large dam debates, for example, reasoning hasn't. And if you look at the infrastructure development projects, which I talked to National Investment Board, for example, then you see what's likely to happen over the years. If all projects over 1,000 crore rupees have to get a nod from the central government bypassing all the rules and regulations, you see what dangerous situation we are sitting in. So therefore, our policy framework itself needs to create a space of public reasoning. And how we actually do it, that's something to be tested, to be piloted, and it has already been done. But I think the more important is to mainstream. And the other important thing when I raise public reasoning as an essential component of public discourse, and I believe that the university system, the academia in this university has to focus more on reasoning, less on the kind of minds that we're developing today. University need to question. Unfortunately, they don't. There's a Vedic mantra which essentially means Shanka se shodh ki taraf aap ja sakte hain. Doubt can lead to research. But today, an amount of research is done without any doubt. So unless you raise questions, how can you research? In my own research, when I did my doctorate, there was no question, but I'm still doing research. And what I found at the end of the day, God knows. But the fact of the matter is that's how the education system is like. So therefore, my plea in an academic setup would be that the state is behaving in a manner which is unlikely of a state. Because state is assuming, and when the state takes an action, all that you see here, when the state takes an action, it has a tacit understanding of what people are like. Now, this is a loaded statement, but keep that in mind. State knows in its action that what people are like, so they behave accordingly. But if the people are of a different like, if they are the questioning kind, if their people are raising question on anything and everything, the state will start behaving differently. Currently, it doesn't. So therefore, if you raise question on nuclear debate, you see how they manipulate the debate. Not because they don't know the threats of nuclear plants or nuclear energy, so to say. It's because of other reasons, other considerations, and we all know that. But therefore, that means there's a need for finding out more space for reasoning and reasoning to be institutionalized. Many years ago, I think before Vinod Rai came into being as a CAG, you hear about him and the cover stories are there. Himanshu, where is he? Oh, Himanshu is a person, he started writing about CAG way back in 2002, 2003. And he would share his articles with me. And I would wonder why this gentleman is writing about CAG. CAG has already produced a report. Now, it's now 9 years later that you see CAG is so important. A reasoning has been institutionalized, and we have ignored that all these years. Thank you, Himanshu, for enlightening us on that. But I think we have come a long way from there. So, reasoning needs to be institutionalized. And we have to find out opportunities to institutionalize those reasoning. And one of them, CAG, is definitely a reasoning institution. Within the democratic sector, at least somewhere we don't see deficit. So, that's a possibility. So, opportunities have to convert it into institutions if we want to see that reason gets some space. But let me caution you a bit. Reason also suffers from biases and blind spots. So, we have to take account of that. That means reason has to be broad-based. It has to involve as many stakeholders in terms of developing profound reasons to be able to challenge the policies of the state. And also, very many, it won't be me alone, it won't be you alone. Many hybrid networks have to continually function to be able to influence or to be able to bring reason into the debate, into the public domain. Now, why it's typically mind game, for example. If you look at a functioning democracy, there is lack of systematic correspondence between what is offered as public justification and what actually gets acknowledged by the citizens. You have seen through presentation, you find that, you know that, where it comes from. So, what is offered as justification? Now, why and how we should take justification just like that? My fundamental question is why people take justification the way it is being offered to us. If we are not happy with the way the system is for delivering or the system is functioning, we must be raising questions. Now, I for one will not be satisfied if somebody tells me that this scheme or this program at least has delivered something. What do you mean by at least has delivered something? Why it hasn't been able to deliver what it was meant to deliver? So therefore, what gets justified and what gets acknowledged, there's a huge gap. You saw some of the gaps in the previous presentation. These needs to question and brought back to the mainstream, not left there itself. So, public reason, what it actually, how do I define it? My definition of public reason is a response to the problem of trust. A lot of mistrust is there in society today. Trust at least doesn't exist. In a society that is besieged with technological uncertainty. What is technological uncertainty? Today, for some reason, if the internet goes off, we are all handicapped. Technological uncertainty. Many uncertainty of that kind. The power failure that we had, power grid failure, technological uncertainty. So we live in a technological uncertain era, an era which is loaded with information but no knowledge, and then we have proliferating expertise available all across, which government has the capability and the intention to misutilize at times, if not utilize. I'll give you one little example here before I finish. Western Ghats, since you are part of Western Ghats here, Western Ghats, we fought for 3 years before we got the Western Ghats Ecological Expert Panel. Thanks to Jadam Ramesh, who immediately agreed to that. The panel gave its report. I said proliferating expertise, but the new minister didn't like that report. So therefore, the next panel of experts are sitting on the same report. Now, that document, which was previously developed, that was based on consensus, that was based on public reason, that was based on campaign, that was based on a lot of stakeholders getting together and putting a panel in place for the government. Suddenly, there was other consideration and a new panel sets up, and the person who heads this panel happens to be the space scientist and nothing to do with the biological systems. So that's a different story altogether. I leave it here. Thanks very much.
No, but take the same question.
My question is basically to Yamini and Sona. Considering the kind of work you do with PAISA, right? If you were to take, and this happened while after you gave your talk, you're looking at it from how the funds are being, released in a sense from central government to, and how it reaches schools. So, what is happening with it. But if you were to take the opposite perspective, have you sort of seen any sort of, because maybe I'm not articulating myself, if you look at the concept of school development plans under the RTE, right? So I'm sure there is a budget component in that. If I want to say build a boundary wall or build toilets, there is some amount of money that I need. If you were to take the opposite view in terms of how much the school is asking for, or and then probably build on it from school to block to district to state. do you actually believe that that sort of a structure would work better in comparison to what we currently have?
Shall we just take a few questions and then...
My question is also for Yamini. So, I've read the PAISA report and I'm very impressed by how scientific it is and gives a great insight into accountability. My question is about the acceptability of the report by the government. So what really happens next? While I think, the PAISA report is great in the sense it corroborates a lot of our, existing knowledge of how things work in the system. But what next? And how seriously do they really take it? And what is the traction that something like this has with the government?
In the PAISA report, you showed about how there is an increase in expenditure towards the end of the... So, that, I'm assuming that happens because the budget, union budget, because of the financial calendar of the government. They have a split budget for railways and general. You think it makes sense for them to have a special education budget which corresponds to the education calendar? So if they have the education budget, instead of putting that in end Feb and having full of March for the parliament to go through it, if they start education, if they have an education budget in say August or September, it means in July, August and September, governments, schools will actually get the cash. So in the start of the calendar, they'll start spending that money. You know what I mean?
You want to answer that?
I'll start with the last one. The answer to your question is, I don't think it would matter what time of the year the budget is. Because fundamentally the reasons why these problems occur are not so much about when a commitment of the quantum of money that should be spent in a given year is made. The timing of that commitment is irrelevant. It is about the processes and procedures that are undertaken after that commitment is made where all the delays come. So to give you, to explain how this cycle works, the union government makes in fact actually the 5-year plan determines over a period of 5 years what is the broad amount of money that will be spent on a particular sector. And then out of that large pie, decisions are taken about how much of that pie will be cut out year on year. Okay, so that's one part of it. Then there's a question of translating that commitment, money commitment into action. So what happens is that technically, and this goes back to where you were coming from, the way in which an education budget should be made for elementary education is that it starts with school management committees. That are these committees of parents who are supposed to every year assess the needs of their school and make what's called a school development plan. Now the nomenclature varies state by state and scheme by scheme, but it's basically a plan where parents are saying, for my school I want an extra classroom, I need an extra teacher, I think that children in class 5 are not really able to learn, so maybe we need a volunteer to come in the evening, whatever. Decisions that parents are making for their schools. Like in all our schools, we have parent-teacher association meetings. Parents would come to the school every month, and if there was an issue in the school, then parents would take that up with the school headmasters and school teachers and discuss, and school management, and discuss how to solve that. The school development planning process is supposed to start somewhere between October and November every year. Right now, as we speak, actually, in an ideal world, all school management committees should be making a plan. This plan then gets aggregated at the district level, where the district education officer, along with a planning committee, sit together and make what's called an annual work plan. This annual work plan is supposed to be a reflection of needs that, so individual schools are making needs, and then it gets aggregated at the higher level, which is the district. This process is supposed to happen between December and January of every year. Then in February, state governments are supposed to take into account the district plans for each of these districts and aggregate all that up into what's called a state level work plan. So by the end of February, all states should have, based on needs that start being articulated at the school level, because of course you can't make a government budget based on individual schools, you have to take those needs and aggregate them up in this fashion. You're supposed to have a plan that is made at the state level. Then the state governments come to the government of India, because the government of India is giving the bulk of this money, where a negotiation happens between the states and the government over what the state is asking for versus how much the government can give based on the budget that the government has allocated in this particular year for elementary education. This process ideally should finish on the 31st of March when the financial year is over, so that on the 1st of April, the first installment can be released to the state. In actual fact, this process begins sometime towards the 30th or 31st of March and runs all the way into April and May, and sometimes even in June. So no state gets its first installment until the end of June, early July. And no state gets the full amount of what it's expected to. The first installment they get is something called an ad hoc grant, that is just one, start the year. And then based on various decisions that are taken in negotiation meetings, the rest of the money is handed over. And what often happens, to give you an example from Bihar, I was in Patna in May this year, just when the Bihar government was going, so the financial year 2 months are in, this was end of May, Bihar government was going to go to Delhi to have its negotiations. And they were complaining that last year, they only got 25% of what they had been given by the government of India. So for various reasons, the total amount of money that they're supposed to get doesn't come. So the point I'm making is that there are many processes that are involved. There are loopholes and bottlenecks and inefficiencies in all of these processes. And it's these processes that are causing these delays, not the timing of when the budget is made. So I really feel if you make the budget in June, you'll still get the same result. To your point on the school development plans, in an ideal world, that is exactly what it should be. I feel that if the objective of ensuring that every child goes to school and actually learns something is to be met, we need to be able to create a system that actually builds its decisions and pedagogical strategies and finances based on the individual needs of children, and that requires a decentralized system. So ideally this should be done through a school development planning process that actually works, which was in fact the motivation of PAISA. We sort of started out with this exercise by saying that money goes to schools. So perhaps this gap in outcomes is because school management committees are not participating in decision making processes. So we decided on an experimental basis to spend some time with some school management committees in Madhya Pradesh to mobilize them and get them involved in taking decisions for schools. We worked in 6 villages very intensively and only successfully mobilized school management committee members in 1 village, where in July a plan was made. And the plan was very basic. All they said was that there's a broken roof and we want to fix that roof so that when the monsoon hits, the children don't get soaked and school can function. No money arrived in July, no money arrived in August, no money arrived in November, all the way actually till January. And the school management committee members said, why should we come to these meetings? We made a plan, we wanted to do something, there's no money that came to our bank account, so why should we actually come to these meetings and do anything? And it turned out that basically the school banks were linked to rural banks that were being upgraded to get an electronic transfer, and that upgradation process took the better part of almost a year. And at every level in the system, no one really knew why the process was taking so long and why it would take and when the schools could expect the money would come. So there was no information given to the schools, the school management committees. There was no predictability. They did not know when the money would come. So they couldn't even take a decision that, okay, we'll put in our money for the next 6 months and we'll adjust it when the money comes or anything. They were just sort of left sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. And it was when I saw that with my eyes that I felt perhaps maybe the first starting point to at least get information out to these school management committees on what monies they should get and when this money should come. And as we started this process, we realized a second big design problem, which is that the way in which, so we have this policy intent, which is that the entire system should start with these plans that are made from the schools. But then when it comes to how we allocate our money and allocate who's taking the decisions, we refuse to give any space to these school management committees. School management committees get only 20,000 rupees on an average in a year in their bank accounts. Even this 20,000 rupees they only get in November, December as our data showed. So they get very little money. And when they get this money, because there's such a breakdown of trust, which goes back to some of the issues that were being discussed in the last presentation, that the higher levels of government refuse to let the school management committees or any lower level of the system take decisions for itself. So I've seen the Madhya Pradesh government has a manual for how money should be spent, which includes how much should be paid to the jamadar that comes to clean the school. So if a school management committee wants to say that actually I don't want to build a toilet, I don't want to build a boundary wall, I don't want a classroom, I just want 2 extra teachers so that the students can be taught in a different way or whatever, could get a little more attention because learning is a problem. The school management committee is not empowered to take these decisions. So we right now are in this very awkward system in terms of how we have an intent to decentralize, but we don't actually, in our design of how we implement our programs, we don't want to actually let go of power. And so we make sure that even though we intend to decentralize, we centralize all the decision making. And one of the objectives of this regular tracking is to be able to use data to put this out there. You're only giving 5% to schools. You're tying all those 5% monies to decisions that are based on manuals that are being made at the district and state level. And even of this 5% of money, it's such a low priority that you never work towards getting it down to schools on time. So that's sort of the idea behind constantly repeating this year after year after year, is to be able to make this point, which sort of comes to the issue that you were talking about, which is in terms of what happens next after the report. So we've tried to do 2 or 3 things in terms of building a strategy around it. One is, of course, building networks with local administrators at the district, state, and as well as in the government of India, and meeting with them and sharing our findings. We found that has actually been a very successful effort, to the extent that it's opened a space for a discussion around these problems of accountability in the way money flows, and in the way money flows, in the way expenditure has been designed, so that this whole question of centralization versus decentralization. So much so that we were last January talking with all the state secretaries when they came for the pre-planning meeting to the government of India, and the midday meal department was there. They heard about the work that we were doing, and they heard our presentation, and in fact asked us to do a similar exercise for the midday meals. But when it comes to direct impact in terms of how this information is being used to actually change the system, I think we haven't gotten very far. In fact, sometimes I feel like maybe we are being counterproductive, because when we started off, I was very nervous, because usually when you're sharing survey data, you're sharing data that hasn't been collected before. So you could argue about sample strategies and sample sizes and so on and so forth, but you can't. But it's difficult to necessarily refute what the data that has been collected. Whereas in this case, we were basically looking at government documents and then telling government people what their documents are saying. And given how opaque the system is, it's very easy for a secretary to say, well, you might say that Bihar is not spending, but you didn't look at the right documents. I mean, I could not question that, because there's no way of knowing. The system is so complicated. But I was surprised to see that across the board, we've always got a very good reception. And when we started analyzing this, I realized that we are being counterproductive, because everything that we say is true, and at every level of the system there's someone else to blame. So when we talk to the center and say you don't release money on time, you don't actually release money in a way that states can spend it based on their needs, and therefore, and the story gets repeated at the school level, they say, yes, but what can we do? Your data also shows quite rightly that state governments don't spend their money properly, and that creates a vicious cycle. So the government of India says we look very good, but it's the state's fault which shows up in the data. So much so that one of the surveys that we do with ASAR, some officials in the ministry didn't actually like ASAR surveys. They had huge issues with that. But in the same breath, they said the PAISA data that you collected is very accurate and absolutely right. Here on the one hand they were saying, oh, your sampling strategy is all wrong for ASAR data, and the same sampling strategy is used for PAISA data, but that was okay. We hear the same story at the state level. State guys say, oh yes, your data makes a lot of sense, but what can we do if only the central government would release the money on time? The district has the same argument to make. So in some unfortunate way, right now what our data seems to be doing is almost, sort of it's reiterating a well-known truth, it's putting data out there, and it's also being used therefore by different levels of government as a crutch to justify their own inaction. Having said that, I think putting it out there and putting it out there repeatedly every year at least forces this discussion. And hopefully over time it may actually lead to the final debate that we would really like to have, which is about the question of decentralization versus centralization, and how you show up, and how transparent or untransparent the system is.
Okay, I have a question to the second speaker and a question to the third speaker. My first question is on fiscal federalism. I'm just interested about what kind of principle you adopt when you as an organization, when you're pretty clear that the state in question is staffed by, let's say, incompetent or corrupt officials, and decentralizing in that situation would very clearly result in money being either appropriated or wasted, right? In that context, and where I'm coming from is the same issue often arises in environmental governance. Doesn't it make more sense to have a strong center-based, this is the design plan for the budget, these are some minimum areas that years of practical experience has established are somewhat important, and therefore go with it, though it's mega inefficient, because at least we know that it won't be a complete appropriation. So I'm curious, when you talk about fiscal federalism, how do you accommodate both for the idea that states could be useful sources of knowledge, but also recognize the risk that there are some states that in some situations would be totally incompetent or totally wicked with that power that is devolved to them. And my question for you, sir, is on reason itself. I'm just sort of trying to get some more information about your perspective. While I certainly agree with the idea of a democracy by discussion, I'm curious how you would respond to the thought that if in India everyone has a voice and this voice deficit no longer exists, it's sort of likely that we'll be drowned out in a cacophony of voices. Isn't it sometimes better to just have, sort of a philosopher king who knows better tell us what to do? Isn't, I mean, I'm curious to see how you respond to that. And sort of related question, do you think the focus is better placed on institutions of justice or institutions of reason, or is it better placed on what people could do in this kind of situation? So I'm curious to see whether there's a universal transcendental truth, or things are in flux and situations differ, small and small. Thanks.
Okay, to you. One more?
Yeah. So we have policymakers in Delhi, and it should measure just implemented in all over the country. So in between, so much money is going to is gone, as you know. So what may be the solution? Like Swaraj system, Gandhiji Swaraj, or Panchayat, as we are working on it. What do you think?
This for Sona, Mitra. You mentioned that the budgets are generally gender blind, that they don't address gender specific issues. Can you give an example of gender non-blind item in a typical budget, especially the social sector spending?
I think to you, I don't know whether you really believe that whether a centralized system is the system of proper governance, or whether you asked it to provoke me, because I would answer to your question as an absolutely no. A decentralized system is basically a system of checks and balances. In fact, the questions that you raise about a lot of maybe corruption, leakage, etc. can be checked by decentralized pattern of governance, and decentralization and in the Indian structure is a constitutional provision for India. When we talk of fiscal federalism, we talk about the fund devolution part of decentralization, which is the fiscal decentralization, which is also a part of the decentralized provisions that the Constitution provides to us. And it is not only about the central funds getting into the state budgets, it is also about how the state funds get into the local level budget, local levels, and the districts, the blocks and the village level, and how resources between the state and the local levels are shared. So also, I would also like to tell you about, much has been said and I don't have much to add, but I would just like to say that since we focus mostly on fund flows, the vertical devolution of funds, the idea that the thing that we advocate for consistently has been that this entire plan schemes, the grants are given directly to the implementing agencies at the district or the block level, bypassing the state budgets. For us, we have been advocating that if it goes via the state budget, it takes care of three problems. First, it takes care of the increasing centralization tendencies that the center has shown over the years, because by bypassing the state budgets and bypassing the state governments in the planning processes as well as budgetary flows. Secondly, it takes care of leakage of funds, because we have from our experience seen that when direct grants are given to the implementing agencies, there are higher chances of leakage, and when it passes through the treasury route, which is from central union budget to the state budget and then to the local levels, it has some checks and balances which can actually control leakage. And I think that answers partly your question, does it? You asked about how funds are, well, I'm sorry, but I think, and lastly to your question, yes, gender blind, why I said, basically budgets are, no, but the common notion about budgets are that they are gender neutral. Why they are called, that is the concept that we question, that budgets are not gender neutral, because the benefits, when they are not properly intended towards women, most of the benefits are actually does not reach the women, and that is precisely why we call that a gender neutral budget is a gender blind budget. Because supposing, if I can give you an example, supposing there's this entire issue of these scholarships, scholarships for girl child. This is a provision which is specifically for women, and it forms a part of the gender budget, right? But had it not been a scholarship scheme specifically intended for women, there would have been incidents that in pockets male children would have got better, more scholarships than female. And this, we say, is because of the existing patriarchal and social norms. And why we say this is because, as you know, I don't think I have to explain further, because in this country, male children are sent to school more than female children, and therefore the intended benefits, if it is not intended specifically to the women, then the benefits are cornered more by male than the female part, and that is precisely why we say that if the budget is gender neutral, it is gender blind. Thank you.
Yeah, interesting. The two things you made, two observations. One on the number of voices, you will be deluged with the number of voices. And secondly, you talk about institutions. I think this is more, sometimes it's subjective in terms of the number of voices. We tend to believe that there are more voices than perhaps can be heard. But at many other issues, on many issues, you don't have voices at all. I was mentioning to some people in the forenoon, saying that, the Yamuna in Delhi is totally polluted. It carries 5,000 million liters of sewage every day, and 1.2 crore people, and nobody even raises a voice. So, voices could be subjective depending on what the issue is and what the concerns are. So therefore, I'm not saying that all voices, but I'm saying definitely voices which can legitimize reasoning in the proper order. So, many of the voices will get diffused on their own, but those who will carry forward the reason itself would be able to be heard, and they need to be heard. That's what is one observation. Secondly, I think the issue of institutions, I think that's a very important issue you raised. Because in my own understanding, and I have already done a paper on this, is that we are still working on the 19th, 18th century institutions, and we are already in 21st centuries. So the institutions need to evolve and need to be developed on a new format itself. Let me give a very simple example. Maybe it fits here, I don't know. But sometimes it feels that, for example, the metro rail in Delhi, remains to be very clean, and some of us who have traveled abroad and many of friends who keep on coming here, they keep on telling us this is one of the finest metros you have. Now, how could a society which keeps on littering every little inch that we have in Delhi. It doesn't do any bit to metro. The answer could be perhaps because there is an institution, a new institution with a new culture, and which is delivering. So I think the people have faith, they want deliverance. So if they see things being delivered, they are being responsive to at least maintaining it. So, this is one example of a new institutional mechanism. Now, had it been given to Indian Railways, you know what the fate might have been. So, there is a challenge now, and I think the more important challenge is to evolve new institutions. You cannot continue to work with the previous institution where the challenges are different, and when the entire society is market society. So, you need to have very different institutions. The focus should be more on institutions. Once the institutions are in place, or at least a process has been made, these voices will contribute to building those institutions. That's what my feeling is. Thank you.
Can I just add to that and just pull to ask together? Because I think what you're asking is a very pertinent question that that advocates of decentralization and institution building need to reckon with and find answers to. I think actually any democracy has multiple voices. And a democracy is only a democracy if it creates spaces for those multiple voices. And institutions are built by creating spaces for those multiple voices to be negotiated so that the majority voice gets heard. The importance of decentralization lies in the fact that by bringing governments quite literally closer to people, it has the ability to create those spaces for those voices to debate, to discuss, to engage, and from those to create new institutional practices. In India, we had institutions in some ways imposed on us from the top. They didn't organically develop, partly owing to our colonial history. What democratic decentralization, and to me why I find the constitutional amendments provocative and interesting, and is that it creates spaces for debate and discussion which could perhaps create democratic decentralized institutions very different to what the amendments have envisaged, and very different to how our current political party systems have or current institutions. We need new institutions, but we need those new institutions to develop from the bottom up, not from the top down, which is the way it's been going so far. So that's where there will be cacophony, there will be a lot of chaos, and inevitably some voices will get marginalized and others will get heard. And in any democracy we see that, even in the, and that's where institutions have to then begin to play a mediating role to ensure that voices that aren't heard also get heard. But at this point in time, I feel that we're not even at a point where ordinary citizens are able to effectively, and we're not talking about what happens on television channels and what happens in the English press, but for the day-to-day lived experience as a citizen in this country has a very limited space for actually articulating voice, debating voice, and drawing on that voice to build institutions, and that's what panchayats and municipalities can do for us.
I'll just add something. To your question, I just remembered you asked about Swaraj or the other things. You see, the word Swaraj actually implies local self-governance. And as Yamini was talking, I was just thinking that the local self-governance, although visualized while doing the 73rd and 74th amendments, which calls for decentralization of the Indian state, that has not been able. I mean, I wouldn't say that we have achieved that in the entire. The governments at the local levels are not actually the local self-governments. There has been political decentralization, there has been, in some states, there has been administrative decentralization in some others, while the electoral processes at the local levels have begun very late. In some of the states, they have been there in some states from the very beginning. So there are differences, and we have to, close these gaps in decentralized in the system of decentralized system of governance. And only after that we could also, not only after that, we have to do the simultaneous exercise of also talking about fiscal decentralization, that is vertical devolution of funds, starting from the union to the local levels, based on a participatory planning processes which would start from the local level government. So that is how your question might get answered. Thank you.
So I'll take the last round because they have to leave. They have to catch a flight to Sydney. So.
My question is to Sona, Mitra, and it's no different from what people have asked on decentralization, but very pointed. Basically, in budgets which are a combination of state share and central share, basically what state does is aggregation of all the demands from districts and blocks and all, right? So, in some cases, central truncates state's budget and in a sense lesser of amount. But then still there could be possibility that rather than sending it to state and district, so on and so forth, they can at least there could be some departments who could be sending it to directly to panchayat or blocks. So the money handling process at state and district and so on and so forth, block level, that could at least be avoided, so that money reaches on time. If at all money reaching the village or money reaching the last unit of delivery is such a concern, that could be done. And what I come from is, in such processes, such deliveries, department follows the success stories of other department rather than listening to others. So is there any advocacy with particular departments running on such initiatives, because this is not unsuccessful. In Narega, decentralized payments are being done at mass level, not at 10, 12, 15 places. That is mass level it is done. So it can be done. So is there any effort from advocacy side to generate such enthusiasm at government level, at least to start with some department?
As I see, as my understanding regarding the decentralization is the decision-making process, where the decision-making process is. So why not to talk about the institutional decentralization, in the sense that why not the authority like the planning commission suppose, why it should not make a laws, that it should think pertinent for the law and governance. So is there any advocacy that these kind of activities should be done, that institutions should be given the power to the power to not make only decision but to make laws, because in better governance.
My question is to sir. I have gone through your presentation. The thing is, what I got it from it, that it was very good summation between something like what a nation state proposes and what people expect from it. And there were talks of institutions, how there needs to be change or how to be certain things on ground for it in reality, what is in practice to be really appropriate for both the nation state and the citizens over there. So one thing which comes to my mind from which you started your presentation, it was like National Investment Board. So whatever discussions we had, there was something we took accountability of bureaucrats and people, but the thing is ministry was somewhere lagged behind, like ministers. So this thing, National Investment Board, it brings to our notion that there will be something where like if someone wants to invest or start a factory or something, he will also have his say. Judiciary also may interpret what will be the outcome, and ministry also have its say. So in this context, I want what you presented to give it a little like what it will be. It may be hypothetical now, but what future lies for us in this country, and it may be an example.
I would like to answer to both of you together, as in whether the advocacy efforts has been there with ministries and with the institutions at the local levels. You see, advocacy can be of different ways, and training and capacity building being one of them. It's not always that at the local level, we do advocacy with the ministries regarding, and I agree with you. You are right. Yes. But at the local level, most of the times we have found that when the schemes are designed, as I was talking, local level participation, that participation is very important. But drawing up a plan to and get it sanctioned and then get funds requires a lot of capacity, which is most of the times not there at the local level. So the advocacy efforts are towards capacity building and training of officials as well as workers at the local level. So that is one. Other than that, there can be a long discussion on this, but I think I won't take too much time and ask Dr. Sharma to speak.
Just very quickly to your specific question, there's something called a technology, I forgot what the A stands for, group. It's called the Tag Up report. It's available online. Nandan Nilekani was the head of that committee that was looking at ways of strengthening the banking network, creating new IDs, sort of using the Aadhaar base basically to be able to drop money down very, very quickly to every level of government. So there's thinking around that. Very practical.
Maybe it's too early to talk about National Investment Board and what implication could be. One is only trying to say that the law of the land must be respected, and if the National Investment Board just to say that the growth of the country need to keep pace with what they have been projected, and therefore you have a national investment board to speed up the development process, bypassing all the laws of the land and also the concern of the local community, and that's what is the concern all about. Because people would get derooted, uprooted, and rehabilitation compensation is such a big issue in this country. What will happen then? So there will be a chaotic situation then. There will be growth for sure, but there will be millions of people who would be sidelined and who would be marginalized in the process of this. So that is where the concern is. Therefore, one is not against or for it, because there are several projects which are more than 1,000 crores. But the blanket argument that all 1,000 crore plus would be taken care by a board and there is to speed up is some concern there. And I think it's early days, but yet we need to raise this concern now. Thanks.
I just have a few questions and I'll just take the next half an hour. All right, thank you very much.